So, ladies and gents, this is a cybersecurity-focused panel discussion. With respect to that, there is a diverse skill set around public and private sector that you see before you. You also see a diverse skill set with respect to understanding of tooling, understanding of the strategic and operational landscape. So I'm going to right now throw out my first question to good Cabello. Let me ask this question, and then from there we can segue into the audience for the next question. How do you recommend public sector organizations prioritize their cybersecurity investments? It's an open-ended question, so by all means there's an exploration to it. Over to you, good sir. Yes.
Thank you so much for the question, and afternoon to everybody. I know we have postponed your lunch for those that were looking to have it, but I'm hoping it will be beneficial for you. Yes. So to answer the question, which really there's no real complete answer for, but for our experiences in terms of dealing with customers, in terms of how we have the conversation with them, is really around reflecting on the institutional knowledge that they presently have. And how that is, at the present moment, looking to actually activate the capabilities around what the future looks like. Because in many instances, obviously, technology is usually seen as the panacea. And for us, we take a different view to say, how do you augment what you presently have in order to then be meaningful in relation to how you progress into the future? So we always start with, the policy framework in which we operate in as an organization. So within South Africa, as we all know, there are various pieces of legislation and policy that are there, probably not coordinated sufficiently enough. But for instance, one is around the National Cybersecurity Policy Framework that the country has written. How do you align with that? What sector are you in? What type of regulatory requirements would you need to obviously fulfill to be able to be seen or deemed as a compliant operating entity within that segment? As an example, we have a client in the aviation space, which obviously has stringent regulatory requirements that they need to look at. And I guess how long is a piece of string? And also because, many of our customers are obviously operating within the global village. So the idea is to understand, how do you then, reflect both from a local perspective, but then how does that translate on a global scale? So there's a lot of things to look at, but really, as is the normal continuum, people, process, and technology, right? So how do you address those elements, not in silos, but as a continuum, which will never be ending? So for us, it's really around not necessarily having a solution, but rather having a framework and a mind view in relation to what we want to achieve. So I think the previous speaker spoke about, strategic business strategy of the company. How does this align with that? How does cybersecurity drive that? How does it provide an enabling, secured platform that then drives confidence in us being able to digitize in an accelerated way? So how does cybersecurity actually position itself as an innovation contributor as opposed to a stifler, which is normally considered? So how do you provide a capability where cybersecurity is productivity enabling as opposed to productivity hindering? I know I've probably asked a lot of questions of myself as I explain this, but this is really some of the key kind of elements that we would walk through with the customer to really kind of get into really a framework, not so much to secure the organization, but how do we enable the organization to be fitting for the future? And how do you have a future-facing kind of view, both cybersecurity, people, and process?
Thank you. Brilliant answer, my good sir. So the extraction of value from those statements, and there's a lot of statements which are packed and layered within that response, good ladies and gentlemen. Consider that this is an evolving science, and you need to be very proactive in your engagements, both, let alone the detection capability, but also your pursuit of the initiative of cybersecurity within your organization. Very, very good points, as well as a consideration of leveraging the current as-is architecture, capability, understandings, and using that as a foundation to build on your aspirations. Excellent. All right, audience members, this is your opportunity. I'm going to throw out a request on the basis of our topic, obviously being the whole foundation within public sector and cybersecurity. For any of those of you who have a question, please pick up your hand and we'll pose it to the panel members.
Thank you. Okay, so this question is addressed to John Bosco, and we can understand that you have dual roles, obviously as part of government and COJ, but also as chairperson of the Chartered CIO Council. And the question I'd like to ask is addressing the last point that Pat had alluded to, in terms of addressing the massive skills gap that we have from a cybersecurity perspective. I think the responsibility of something like the Chartered CIO Council would need to take that on from from a South Africa perspective. How does the Chartered CIO Council have a plan? Does the ICITP have a plan to address these skills gap practically?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think there are three elements to that question that I'd like to answer. In terms of readiness, I think as a council we are very ready. In fact, we have started looking from a competency and a skills perspective to look at certain activities that we'll use to start benchmarking and help industry actually to build those skills and capabilities from a council perspective. What we've also done is we started engaging with institutions like UJ, as an example, with other institutions as well that are playing within the security space. And what we started doing was to start standardizing the role profiles and the skills requirements and the competency requirements for security resources in the industry. Because what we found out is that if you are in ICT or even in security, to zone down more to the security zone, you are always governed by the industry that you are in. So when you're in banking, the bankers want to manage you according to how banking works. In retail, they will want to do the same. In public sector, we've got 1,001 plus, just one extra in case we miss it, acts and laws and policies and legislation that we need to fit in. And even in government, if people don't even understand that there's also industries in government. Because there's education, there is retail, there is everything that you think you see in private sector, there's a portion of it sitting within the public sector. And if you don't have standards for those industries, how are we ever going to decide if that resource is good enough? How do we deal with a role profile where you have certain roles and responsibilities? How do I say that that particular security officer or that CISO has operated within the best interest of not just the entity they're working for, but also in terms of from a professional designation perspective? You see, what we're trying to do there is to make sure that we don't have, excuse me for myself, comments when CISOs and CIOs have to face the media because there's a certain breakout. We need to make sure that people are not only skilled to do that, but they have the qualifications and the certifications, and the trust factor is very, very important. And the only way we're going to achieve the trust factor is if we create standardization in terms of the different levels of the profile within the security business, but also to help build a growth path for these guys to continue to grow. It's like if you're in the accounting sector, you have to earn CPD points, or in the construction sector, for you to continue to remain relevant. And we need to create opportunities for learning in that way for people to continue remaining relevant, but also then remaining professional in their etiquette. And the last part is that when we do have an issue with an organization that says, you know what, my CISO has gone off the rock somewhere, they no longer say they're just sassy, they're just moody, they're just not doing what they're supposed to be doing. We then have a code of conduct that one can go to and say, this is how they will actually operate and how they will deal with particular things in a professional manner. But I think what is very important, and I think I spoke to that earlier today, is the conversion of certifications, of qualifications, both from a tertiary as well as a professional development perspective. And we are finding that convergence is happening a lot sooner now than what is currently happened before. I'll give you an example. The Chartered CIO qualification is now no longer just a professional body qualification. In fact, it's been accepted by the Senate of UJ, and they'll be the first university in South Africa to actually provide a tertiary qualification for professional body certification. And that is to try and get this unity. So what we're doing from a council perspective, in a broader perspective, is actually to take hands with industry and say, what is it that security officers needs to do? What is it that a CISO needs to do for you to do that? And then also is to make sure that those qualifications that you are getting from any of the OEMs or any of from the organizations that have products and solutions, is to make sure that their training now is also aligned towards the professional body development and not just a product training. Because if you understand security at its highest level, we found that you would actually have more effective use of the technologies that you have to deploy. And I think I'm going to leave it for now. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent, good Sir John. Brilliant answer with respect to a contemplation of the practical implementation of certain levels, as well as what should be considered whilst we are implementing. I most certainly am an advocate for the academic base and the experiential base, and I support what the panel is saying around the fact that a combination of both makes the most sense. Right now, we are at a spot where our industry is past its infancy so far as cybersecurity is concerned. Now we are aware of what is expected of us, of what we should charter for the next few years in the sense of truly defining what a cybersecurity professional should be. So great stuff. To that note, I'm going to move on to the next question. But before I do that, we are going to ping pong between the audience as well as a contemplated question online. And this is an online question which is directed to you, good Sir Trump. What are some of the most pressing technical vulnerabilities that public sector organizations should address at the bare minimum?
All right, so to connect to what Pat was saying, I think the human factor is key there, right? Which ties into, education, not just in terms of the professionals that'll be, apologies, managing our systems and looking after, what's on premise. I think there's a couple of things. Typically, there's a strategy from the business side. This is what we need for security. Then there's a requirement. What is the technologies or controls that we need to put in place? Then is it, okay, who's going to take ownership and be responsible for that? Now, that often happens to be siloed, and the one is not interconnected with the other. So from a getting it off the ground, let's get it right point of view, is get all the stakeholders involved. The CIOs and CISOs and COOs, they're not above the operational level, right? Everybody should be in the same room and have some kind of responsibility for either the strategy part connected to the technology part, the technology connected to the human part. How do you bring all of that together? Because typically it's at an operational level, then we drive it up to management level, then somebody has to go and pitch it to the boss. The boss does not understand what's happening on the ground. That's why he should be in the room when the operational planning is taking place. So I think the key thing is involve the people with hands-on every day that deal with the issues and have an open mind from a C-level to take the inputs and possibly critic that you'll get to say, I don't think we're spending wisely or doing enough, because you want everything to happen, but you're not coming to the party in terms of getting all the stakeholders' input.
Oh, excellent. Good people around the audience, I think the digestion of that point is a very important one. Holistic engagement, strategic, tactical, operational. Strategic, executiveship, tactical management, operational, on the ground. All of those contribute to the cybersecurity engagement strategy and execution. Should not be isolated and should not be dictated. Should be a consultative process. I think at the end of the day, that almost opens us up as a strategy for everyone's organization around the table to almost emulate a bit of a cybersecurity gym of sorts, where there's a scenario planning of a particular event that happens. How would your strategic layer respond? How would your tactical layer respond? What would your operational layer need to do? So this is a lot of contemplation coming out of these questions. And it's some good contemplations that I would invite you as an audience to take away and consider. All right, I'm going to open it up to the audience right now in the sense of questions. I see that there is immediately a question which is available.
Panel, I wanted to ask a question about digital transformation in the government, right? In the perspective of, are we ever going to move to a framework that just belongs to us as Africa? That still speaks to ISO and ITIL and COVID, but is more aligned to government and our challenges that we face, from finances to budgets to skills. Because when you look at those frameworks, they're very beautiful, but implementation becomes a problem. So what's the bare minimum of security we can actually get from those and create our own framework and our own benchmarks to move forward? Thank you.
Thanks for that. Let me frame the question on the basis of the concept. We have a lot of frameworks. The frameworks that we have are used for different elements of business. We talk about ITIL, COVID, and all types of initial structures, NIST, guidances, and those have very, very specific intentions. Those intentions might not necessarily speak all of the time to cybersecurity, but on the basis of holistic digital transformation, they do play a part. I think our good audience member is considering the point, and I'll frame the question now. What's our best strategy with respect to a cohesive understanding? What do we combine? How do we do this? What do we look at and what frameworks can we adopt that gives us the best coverage? What strategy should we think about? And I'm going to hand that to you, good Kabelo.
Hey, good. Thanks for the question. It's a tough one to fully answer, at least in this session. But certainly, what we've done from an organizational standpoint, at least the organization that I represent, is something that we've embarked on. Is kind of the Pan-African cyber renaissance that we are trying to manifest, implement, execute within our own organization and in engagements that we have with clients. So. It's really around how do we make it more relevant to the conditions that we obviously find ourselves operating in as a country. Now, the reality is, the world is a very small place now, and it's become even smaller post-COVID. And the idea is that we obviously operate in a global village. And the idea to be, internationally or globally competitive would ultimately require us, one, to obviously attend to some of these frameworks that exist currently, but again, to give it a bit of an African flair. No? So there's particular ways in which we do things. We have certain cultural norms, mores, that are very relevant to us, particularly how we train people, how we bring people into the organization in order to drive some of the implementations of these frameworks. Now, the idea is not so much that the framework is a tick box exercise. It should really be about a cultural set, right? Our ability for excellence, the pursuit of excellence. How do we deliver excellence? Obviously making sure that we kind of have a tinge of African capabilities that are built into that. In fact, a whole lot more than a tinge. We need to take the whole cupboard of sources and put them together. But in terms of frameworks, we obviously provide ITGRC capabilities with the organization that I represent from a governance, risk, and control perspective. Ours is not so much the framework, but it's in relation to how does the framework then feed into what your aspirations are as the organization. And as the moderator had said, there are aspects of it that are necessary for us to operate in the world that we all operate in today. There are some that are probably a bit more stifling that need to be given our context and our environment within the country. So we don't push frameworks. We first understand in relation to what the overall ambition is of the organization, and then kind of try and map that in, against ultimately what frameworks would be most suitable. So for me, for us as an organization, we are an African organization, born and bred here. Ours is to obviously see how do we first demonstrate that we have global capabilities to ultimately execute against these frameworks. Because only then do you then create a platform to be able to bring the rest of the world along around how you feel African fused elements need to be built into some of these frameworks, or at least how they're approached and delivered. So for me, it's around excellence primarily. And I know government is on a big drive, particularly the customers that we are obviously addressing, particularly around how they're skilling their people, to obviously ensure that excellence is the forerunner, and then subsequently innovation really follows with that in a very symbiotic way. So for me, it's to say, not to throw away the frameworks, but to ultimately say how best do we then apply ourselves to it with an underpinning of excellence, and then how do we then drive innovation to that to that extent. So it's more around how do we make ourselves relevant in the world, and then subsequently how do we then create a room and a space where we then ultimately add the customizations that are required in relation to how we operate as a country or a continent, if you would like. Because in many instances we speak as individual countries, but we are a continent, and I'm mindful that there are 54 individual countries in the continent. But really, how do we galvanize that and almost position that cyber renaissance, African, Pan-African cyber renaissance kind of objective? And that's going to require collaboration, much more than what we are doing now, but we try and foster that.
Thank you, good Camilla. I think, ladies and gentlemen, it was most certainly quite a question that was posed, and it was layered. And there was some exceptional takeaways from the answer on the basis that if we are considering holistically what is happening, it is most certainly a bit of a renaissance so far as cybersecurity goes. We mentioned earlier that we're out of our infancy as an industry. What does that mean? That means it's time to grow up. And basically, that means that we charter our destiny on the basis of the future, on the basis of catalyzing innovation, on the basis of defining what is the expectation from an academic point of view, from an experience point of view. I like that is one of the pivotal topics. If you are data mining the narrative that is happening between everyone, that is being sifted out of here, that we're chartering the future on an academic and experiential base, that we're trying to shape our industry, and we're actually doing it here right now with your help, ladies and gents. I'm going to segue quickly for a minute to draw your attention to what is on the presentation board. There is a question, and that question is basically, when you are considering public sector and cybersecurity in the same sentence, what word or short phrase immediately comes to your mind? And I must say, given the word cloud that is coming up, it's quite interesting. We have things which are aligned to a vulnerable space, a reaction strategy which is needed, not aligned. Interesting. Someone just basically said attack, which is a very interesting notion as well. But we have a bit of a synergy around the fact that we acknowledge this is a vulnerable space and a space which needs attention. All right? I'm going to go back to the audience and re-engage question-wise. Yes.
My name is Eve. I'm from a National Government Department of Minerals and Energy. I'm in internal audit, and I am always plagued by a worry that one day is one day when our department, just like many other government departments, is attacked. And my question is, it would seem to me that cyber and cybersecurity in public service is almost left to individual government departments. And I would like to know, I mean, I don't sit at GITO, but what is the national strategy for South Africa in terms of public sector for how we respond? First of all, how we even know if we are targets of a cyber crime exploit, and how we respond to that, because it would seem that we're still siloed in even our IT strategies. When Tivet was presenting on zero trust, solution, I sat there thinking, we're still running legacy applications in government. I mean, it's here and there that we adopt cloud-based solution, but by the mere fact that we're still running legacy applications, old infrastructure, we then open ourselves up to security risks when we now go on cloud-based solutions for which we do not have standards. So I wonder if it's even an efficient approach where you just leave it with the budget of a particular public sector organization for them to figure it. So shouldn't we gather our resources as public sector, and maybe that's where CETA would have a role to play, a strategic role according to what I see, to sort of galvanize what we have as current resources to respond appropriately as a country, not as the department of, or, that's just what I'm pondering, to say, are we not working in silos? Should we not gather our resources and see from a strategic point of view how we drive even technology innovation such that we are able to respond to the cyber issues that we are inherently facing. Thank you.
A very good question, I must say. I'm going to tackle it and hand it over to our panel members on the basis of two primary elements to elevate the question. Good points. You mentioned governance, risk control, and legislature, the GRCL environment. There is so many, many different frameworks and statutes and expectations of us. And it doesn't just stop at the cybersecurity level. It makes sense that this sort of cohesion and cognitive ability that we need to have regarding our spaces can sometimes get convoluted. There is so much for us to consider, like I mentioned. And the next part, on the basis of that statement, is that because there is so much, wouldn't it make more sense for us to centralize our efforts? Wouldn't it make more sense for us to actually have an enabled body which does the centralization and which does the cybersecurity initiative for our public sector? Let's consider public sector here in clarity. Interesting. Or should it be decentralized? What are the merits of centralization and what's the merits of the decentralization? I like this because one of the rules that we had mentioned was that let's open up our opinionation. Everyone might have a viewpoint, and all viewpoints do have credibility and merit on the basis of the narration. So yes, on that note, to sum up the question, centralized, decentralized effort of cybersecurity within public sector. Your opinion, good Sir John?
I just had a feeling it was coming my way. But fortunately for you, Chair, I think I'm eloquently versed to answer it. So just to add to some of the points that the young lady was raising over there, and I understand your pain, trust me. So in national government, there has already been an attempt at standardizing and creating a platform within which we respond to cyber attacks. You'll find that there are certain legislations in place. There has been some sort of a governance oversight body created, of which CITA is part of, the Department of Defense, the State Security Agency, National Treasury, etc. And even in the example that we had within the city of Johannesburg, we could within an hour's time mobilize the military, mobilize SAPS, mobilize the Department of Justice, mobilize CITA and the State Security Agency to deal with the event that we had within the city of Johannesburg context. So at a national level, when you talk about centralize, decentralize, so I think from a national level, centralize is good in terms of how your incident responses are. Because remember, if you're in public sector, you're an organ of state. That's the first and most important thing. So when one is attacked, the state is attacked. And I think because we don't have awareness around how to actually register these events and how to get them at the national platforms that are available, I think there needs to be some awareness done on this, because I think if we start centralizing it at a policy level as well as at an incident portfolio level perspective, we would be able to actually deal with cyber events much better. And as an auditor, it will make your life easier, because you would then know that if there is something around cyber prevention, etc., or use cases that you want your clients to do to show their readiness and their maturity to be able to respond to a cyber attack, you would then have a standard toolkit in your hand that is informed by the State Security Agency, the Department of Defense, SAPS, and so on, and all these other stakeholders that are already part and parcel of that. Because government is a very wide and diverse entity, remember, government has 4 operating levels in which we operate. We have a national government that sets policy, standards, directive, and portfolios. We have a provincial government that deals with programs, delivery of programs, and it deals with certain elements which come from national, and they have to make sure that delivery at a program level takes place. We have local government, which is the delivery arm of government. They meet the citizen, the resident, the account holder, the etc. They meet business on the ground, and they actually see to the day-to-day delivery of those government services. And that's why even at the local government sector, we've got metros, we've got district municipalities and local municipalities, each one of them with their own specific role and function. And then the fourth one is the entities that government has created, because, and these entities cover both national, provincial, and local, where they said, you know what, we don't have a set of competency around rail. Let's create Transnet. Maybe that's not a good example, but you understand where I'm going, right? So let's create these entities, and each of these entities, unfortunately, because of the Companies Act, they are now registered as companies, which means we look at them the same way we look at Standard Bank, the same way we look at all these other organizations. However, there is a catch. They are the only companies in this country that has to adhere to both company rules and government rules. That's why even in order to have to respond both, and if you're a municipality, you have to respond to the Municipal Systems and Structures Act and everything that goes with it, or the PFMA, etc., at a provincial level or national level. And you have to look at King 3 and Oxab and Oxley and everything else that sits on the other side, because you have boards, you have all these other institutions. Now, for government to work effectively, we cannot create a single point of failure. So from a delivery perspective in security, it will become federated. So you'd see that every province will adopt a certain way and approach of how they want to deal with things. And you'll see specifically, I haven't touched technology yet. They're dealing with it at a program level. How do we deal with this? How do we work together? So eGov at Gauteng, as an example, they would get all the municipalities together and we say, okay, right, what are you doing policy-wise? What are you doing response time-wise? What are you doing A, B, C, D, E? So that we can then unite and create one way of how we're going to deal with it in a province like Gauteng or Limpopo or Mpumalanga, etc. Then when it comes down to the actual delivery side of the technology, CIOs need to make a decision if they want to be part of a centralized as a service environment, or do they want to have different variations of different pieces of technologies but seeking to achieve the same thing. It will give you certain 5 very key capabilities that your security technologies need to give you. The ability to audit yourself, the ability to audit your security technology, because while you're setting it up to audit everything else, who's watching the watcher, right? So you need to have that. The second thing is, how do you build your resources and your skills base to be able to do that? And how do you put the necessary controls in place to make sure that everything is manageable, there is audit trails, there's all these other things that is required. The next thing that you also want to do is you also want to make sure that from a delivery perspective, you do not create single points of failure. So redundancy and business continuity are part of the things that you need to do. And then the last one is, I'm hacked. How do I get out of a disaster? So if you then start looking at the way we deal with those things and then start rolling it up the line, I believe we could actually operate quite effectively in a centralized, federated environment in security in government. Thank you.
Thank you, good panel member. Yes, absolutely.
The medium time to respond wasn't great.
Thanks for the answer, John. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think I might have forgotten my question. But I think, okay, my name is Ponson Ngamane, and I'm from Telkom, still doing my internship in security. I don't know if this is so much as a question. A few weeks back, I actually went to a hackathon. In that hackathon, I ended up being a joke because they called me security. But it actually opened my eyes to say that programmers, who are the people who are creating everything that we are using, people on the ground, actually do not have respect or the knowledge of cybersecurity or security as a whole. So you were talking about breaking down silos, but I heard most of the talk was with business. It had to do with business. And with cybersecurity, they tend to be more business oriented, so when they actually engage with the programmers, that's when you'll find actually the silos because of, I don't know, somebody did say that cybersecurity professionals are powerful. Maybe it's because of that, I don't know. But I was just wondering that when you did say that cybersecurity is no longer an infant, we are growing now, when are we going to have such discussions, such initiatives as the hackathons where we can actually come together as technology people? I mean, at the end of the day, I might be in cybersecurity, somebody might be in another department. We are all after the same objective. So when are we gonna, or isn't that gonna be actually something that's gonna help in breaking down the silos and understanding that in a business we are actually fighting towards the same goal instead of destroying each other? So thank you.
It's a great observation that you made. And I think one of the key things that, and I think Pat may have touched on it earlier, is that security is everybody's responsibility. Okay? It's not IT's responsibility or the CIO's responsibility or the bid adjudication committee's responsibility. Security is everybody's responsibility. And until people realize that, it's funny how, if you work in a financial institution or you work at payroll at one of the government departments, right? You have access to very privileged access or information of people. And then, someone says, listen, do you mind sending me the list of bank details because we're going to update payroll? You don't second guess it at someone there and you send it to them. But yours isn't on the list. If yours was on the list, you'd say, okay, what do you need it for? Okay? Because taking an action or doing a task that doesn't directly involve you or something that can harm you or, get back to you, people tend to just do it. Where's the security thought in that? So always think of any information that you access as if it's your own. And if it was yours, what would you do with it? What extra question would you have for the person asking for it? So I think from a mind share point of view, like you mentioned, is at Hackathon and things like that, we say, all right, the bad guys must tell us. What are they going after? What are the soft targets? And then the good guys must tell us, how do we combat that? Because that'll drive to everybody's level of security understanding. Because if someone calls you up and says, listen, give me your bank details, we just want to verify your account. There's a whole lot of things that happen in your head. If someone asks you for the bank details of, the company, you say, I'll forward it to you. Okay, so that's the thing. I think the first thing is, and again, the people element, the human factor that Pat spoke about, is we need to realize security is everybody and your first responsibility. And then when people adopt that, it doesn't become an afterthought. And I think then everybody will, start collaborating more efficiently around, what have I done today to ensure security for the organization?
Thank you, Mr. Trump. I think on a strategic level, most certainly, one of the extracted points which we need to take away as a collective group is that cybersecurity doesn't sit in isolation. The knowledge of cybersecurity itself shouldn't sit in isolation. And that's where we're finding ourselves at a juncture where right now the specialism of our understanding of the industry should actually be standardized in between and interrelated to other industries themselves. Sure, we can take the concept of what we had mentioned earlier on about the Maslow hierarchy of needs and the need for security, and security being so pivotal within business. And unfortunately, you're in a situation where you have also inherited the mantle of being the champions of doing that. It's a heavy burden, but it's a good opportunity for you as an individual, as a professional, and as a growth pattern. Strategically, indeed, tactically, also relevant. Operationally, it really depends on the culture of the organization and how far they want to go with respect to enforcing cohesion. I've known some organizations which actually cascades interrelated KPIs where the development division has to instrumentally demonstrate security. And sometimes that's necessary to go down to that fundamental level. So then at least there's co-ownership, and eventually that becomes part of the culture of the organization because there's opportunities of appreciation that happen within that opportunity that, okay, I'm now exposed. And exposure is very important. So great answer. Thank you, David. All right, good people. I think we are at a point in the conversation where we are almost at a roundup. I'm going to suggest one more question and then move into a united contemplation of what we have on the screen. So far as the singular question is concerned, this is actually connected to an endpoint of a prior audience member asking this question. But I'm going to pose it to us as a whole panel. We sit with a very unique circumstance within our South African context. It would be nice if we have a bit of an elevated notion of our infrastructure, and we're getting there. It is a bit of a growth, it is a bit of a path. And right now we are at a spot where certain of our public sector constituents have legacy infrastructure. Some of them haven't even, and it shouldn't be the case. Some of them, I'd say a good number of them haven't evolved, be it in cloud or otherwise, for the sake of reluctance, for the sake of fear, for the sake of budget, whatever it may be. We're sitting now in a segue where what is the strategy for those particular organizations which are not ready for the modernization plunge? How can outdated entities and constituents within the public sector consider their path of evolution? And can they get into a cybersecurity sensitive state with that legacy infrastructure? How can we help them? Are there strategies? Are there tools? I'm going to suggest that we'll round robin it, and it'll be a minute or two between each one of us. But yes, go ahead, John.
So I actually, after my presentation, I had the question at the booth as well. So you saw the nice blue cloud that I showed you earlier? That's our. So what will happen is, because you have legacy infrastructure sitting on premises or somewhere in a hosted type environment, because of the way our technology is presented to a user, we can support legacy operating systems through connectivity models. Okay, so you can have an application, and I mean, we've got some big departments that have applications that were custom created for them, that were not future-proofed for newer operating systems. They can't move away from them because there's so much that is reliant on them. So what we do is, you can still use that, but because there is no access to the application or the system it's running on, because of our ability to be the presentation layer to whatever entity needs access to it, you can still use that and plan for future-proofing or migrating into newer entities. Because a lot of guys are, I have this legacy operating system, is there something that I can put on it to secure it and lock it down because we need it for a certain functionality? Now you can take something like Zero Trust and extend that application's ability to a wider audience through, you know, employees and contractors and clients as well.
Thank you. Over to you, good. Cabello? Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I think John stole my thunder, but yeah, but nonetheless. But so for me, it would really be around. So usually what we do with clients, you know, cloud. The cloud is obviously a big thing. We obviously all know about the DPSA circular that came out last year that effectively gave the green light to public sector to be able to consume cloud, or at least to leverage or take advantages of the cloud. I think it would be really good. I'm presuming all the audience members here certainly have had a look at that circular from Department of Public Service and Administration that effectively has given that go ahead. But I think they then go about saying this is really kind of the approach or the framework that you should employ when adopting cloud. So for us, usually what we try and position is kind of a cloud adoption framework, kind of engagement as an initial start point to say, what does the cloud mean to us for Department of Mineral Resources and Energy? How does it enable our ability to kind of render our regulatory functions and jobs to ultimately ensure that we bolster the mineral resources capability of our country? It's not it's not cloud for cloud's sakes. It's around how cloud enables our ability to then drive a lot of our strategic imperatives. Security obviously is imperative. I think Pat also had mentioned it's around how do you ensure that security is built in by design and adequately baked in. I'm really glad that there's a young lady who's obviously taken up the mantle of being in the cybersecurity space. I know there was a bit of a slur made against women in the last presentation around the inability to limit what they share on the internet, but equally so, there's an innate ability in women, and particularly in our organization, where we have a cyber defense team monitoring our SOC, that it's an all-women cyber defense team that looks at that, and for some odd reason, women have an innate ability to measure patterns, locate patterns. I think all of us as males have been beneficiaries of that for various other reasons, which I won't mention here. But for me, it's really around understanding what cloud and innovation looks like for us, not what the world says we should look at it as. It's really what do we look at for us, and that obviously is really around how we bring our people along for that journey. We've had clients as well, legacy applications. How do we modernize those applications? How do we ensure that in modernizing those applications, we ensure that security is top of mind and front of mind? But rather around what is this application going to mean in relation to activating true return on investment out of our operations? Mission critical applications, obviously I understand. But for me, it's really around the first point of call. What is innovation for us? What does it look like for us? And how do we intend on getting there together as us, as an organization? And hopefully putting in a path that would outlive whoever it is that crafted it at the time. I think that's the issue in many instances. People are writing strategies for the time in which they will be in an organization, rather thinking about 10, 15, 20-year trajectories, which is then possibly speaking to some of the questions that were raised. That some people are saying, hey, I'll just manage this application while I'm here. Depending on what will happen afterwards, I'll leave it to the next person to deal with that.
Thank you, good sir. I'd also like to contribute the whole concept of a shared approach, a shared value proposition, but I'm going to allow good sir Arun to tackle that question as well.
Thank you very much. So if I had to do a quick survey here today and say who here still has legacy applications, and the ones that do have can stay in the rooms and the ones that don't can leave, I'm sure most of the OEMs will be gone out of this meeting, right? But the rest of us will still be here. So we all live with legacy applications, and how do we deal with actually legacy applications in our environment? I think if Dr. Zani, who's head of security for City of Johannesburg, have to hear me one more time ask him to create a DMZ, so we can keep the Auditor General happy, and we can essentially wrapper that whole environment around a cloak of security and put it in its own DMZ, put DLP on top of it, make sure nobody can steal data from it, make sure, meanwhile, when you're in the application, you are there. So what we do is literally, we know we can't change the way the application behaves. We can't change the security in the application because it's that legacy. But because it's mission critical, we literally put a cookie wrapper around this thing, and we put a tunnel in front of it to say, okay, fine, we know once you're in there, you can do what you want, but you're going to go down this very narrow road, and in there, you're going to find a little door, you enter your little DMZ, you're going to get in there, you're going to do whatever is required for you to try and protect. And then while we have control over the tunnel, we're going to check if there's any data sneaking out, any things that are going in or out that shouldn't go in and out, and deploy many of these type of solutioning to dealing with legacy applications. Obviously understand that the long-term strategy needs to be in place. And the long-term strategy needs to talk to the modernization of those applications. But because they are so critical to business, you need to look at the modernization approach of your applications in three particular environments. The first one is looking at where these applications are actually going to live. You know, and I've had this question so many times. People are saying, do you want to be on-prem? Do you want to be in the cloud? And I'm saying, but you're asking the wrong question. The question is not if you want to be on-prem or if you want to be on the cloud. The question is, do you want to have cloud or not? And I'll tell you why I'm saying that question, because I'm saying it differently is, cloud is not a destination. We need to realize that cloud is a capability that allows you to put your solutions, your applications, your services in an environment that can be consumed on any device, any geological presence, any place, any time. And that's why even at COJ, when I had to have the same conversations with the mayors and the MMCs and the GCTOs in our environment, it was to say, but why are you buying infrastructure when our journey is to go to cloud? In the modernization of certain applications today has dependency on the capabilities of the infrastructure required. So what I did buy was not just a set of servers. No, I bought cloud infrastructure. So that the journey to cloud, while it's there as a strategy, it will give me the capability to create both on-premise as well as off-premise cloud capabilities. And when we go off-prem, that's when I start dealing with people on the outside. But once we go there, there's a piece of law that says data must remain in country. So I don't have a lot of negotiations. That's why we've been putting pressure on a lot of service providers, both in the cloud space as well as on an OEM space, to allow a different way of how they build applications. Because in the olden days, we used to leverage OS capability, used to leverage compute capability, and we used to leverage the actual application capability for it to deliver certain services. Now we have to think differently. We now have to separate the compute and memory pieces from the application, and we have to now deal with the application in the same way so that when we do go to cloud, nothing will prevent me to take the compute and memory and put that off-prem in another country if I need to. Or I can still have the data and certain things living in country. So it changes the way you need to start looking at the design of what you need to achieve for this particular thing to work in your space. So I think the answer that I have is very, very short and simple. Make sure you have a journey, you have a migration plan in terms of how you're going to modernize your applications. If not, you're going to sit with that cookie wrapper forever. You're going to have to put this thing in its own DMZ, you're going to have to do all these other little things I spoke about earlier to get that environment to keep it safe. So you can be compliant so that the AG can give you a tick and say you are a very good guy. But business is saying, dude, people are talking on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on WhatsApp, they're engaging, they're doing business, where are we? Right? So you're getting that push from business to have a more open and transparent way of doing business. The second thing you need to do is, from a security perspective, is you need to invest in 4 things. You need to invest in a baseline that will help you to see what's going on in your environment. Sometimes you don't need to know something is wrong, but when you see something, it gives you that visibility. The second thing you need to do is to say, okay, what is core for me that is going to be needed everywhere? Is it a SIEM? Is it an antivirus? Is it a this? Is it a SOAR? Is it a what is it that we need to have? And do I need to have all of this in one? Or do I need to have these separated so that I don't create single points of failure? So these are the questions you need to ask yourself. The third thing you need to ask yourself is, how am I going to establish a competency center that will start at a certain point, but will be able to grow with the security requirements that I have, that will not only be able to audit me and my security environment, but will also help to leverage the skills and the information that's out there. Remember earlier, when I had my presentation, I spoke to the issue of where you have these bodies that you need to have so that you can actually then, if you're on these security bodies, you know what the latest hack is, you know somebody that's gone through something. Those bodies of knowledge is important. So you need to establish a body of knowledge that will help you reside in your SOC. That's why I said, at least if you have visibility in the start and you have a body of knowledge, you start to become aware of what is going on and you learn lessons from other people. And the last one for me is you need to decide on what is the best way to capacitate your capability around security. Do you want to have it as an internal function? Do you want it as a managed service? Do you want it outsourced as a service, security as a service? Or do you want to have some hybrid model where you have certain controls and have certain measures in place, but you still leverage off some external service providers to do 1, 2, or 3? So I think those are the key things for you to look at in the event that you do have legacy applications for you to deal with your security elements. If not, you and the AG are never going to be friends. You're going to have a standard finding sitting on your AG report year after year, and eventually people are going to say, but guys, now what? And if you look at now with the powers that the AG has, they can actually take your money away. So this thing is real, guys. It's no longer like what we used to call a government performance report. It's a never-ending thing. Who cares? I'll just get my salary next month. The AG now has certain powers. There are certain powers that have been given to them. And they now have the ability to say, fine, if you're then not going to make something of this, then we're now going to start penalizing you. And that's the last one. So when you have to deal with those consequence management on security issues, I think your ability to have an incident response task team, the ability to have all these things in place. So while you yet can't solve the issue, but if you have the capacity behind it to manage the issue and to drive it, you'll find yourself, and with that bodies of knowledge and access to external people and experts, you'll find yourself suddenly in a different maturity level. And don't be scared to speak to the agent and say, you know what, I've got a 5-year journey to get to a maturity level A. That's better than having nothing. Have a foresight, have a strategy, have an endpoint in mind. Who cares if it's going to change next year? But at least you have the ability to say, I want to do 1, 2, and 3, and the AG will help manage compliance to that. And I use the AG a lot in my environment. I probably shouldn't say this in front of my guys here, but it's the best way to get money in government. It's an AG finding. If I don't address it, city manager, DG, president, it's on you. So don't be scared of audit. Use audit to your ability to be able to make sure that you become and you enhance the compliance ability within your department or entity. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, good. John.